My father is going to destroy all of you for this. Her voice cracked just slightly on the word destroy. Fear was finally entering the room. I opened the portfolio slowly, not for drama, but because my hands had become very still. And when my hands get that still, somebody is about to lose something important. My name is Emma Carter. I'm 33 years old. And the last thing I expected after a red-eye flight back to Chicago was to walk into my family's ugliest betrayal under the bright white lights of my own hospital. I had landed that morning after 3 weeks in California, overseeing emergency wildfire response partnerships, and drove straight from O'Hare to St. Alden Medical Center because something had been bothering me for days. Quiet rumors, delayed purchase approvals, staff messages that sounded strangely careful, as if people were afraid to say the wrong thing out loud. I didn't use the executive entrance. I wanted to see the building the way ordinary families saw it, with worried faces at the front desk, wheelchairs moving past polished floors, overhead announcements cutting through the air, and that sharp antiseptic smell that never really leaves a hospital. That was when I heard shouting near the valet stand, an elderly valet. One of the gentlest men in the building was being humiliated over a luxury SUV left in the sun. I stepped closer, already angry before I fully recognized the voice. Then the man turned and my chest went cold. It was my brother, my own brother. Before I could even say a word, he flung the half-full coffee in his hand straight at me. Cold espresso splashed across my cream blazer, soaked through my blouse, and dripped onto the marble floor. Then he pointed at me and shouted loud enough for half the lobby to hear. "You better watch yourself. My wife's father is the CEO of this hospital." I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just looked at the stains spreading across my clothes and understood that the coffee wasn't the real disaster. It was the proof that something rotten had been growing here while I was gone. Before I tell you what happened when I called my husband and why the entire lobby went silent 10 minutes later, tell me what time it is, where you are, and where you're watching from. I really want to see how far this story travels. The first thing I felt was not rage. It was disbelief so sharp it almost numbed me. My younger brother Ryan stood there breathing hard, his expensive shoes planted wide apart like he owned the entire lobby, while the old valet beside him kept apologizing for something that wasn't even his fault. Ryan had always been reckless, arrogant, and allergic to consequences. But there was still a part of me, some stupid, stubborn, grieving part that had kept hoping he would eventually grow up. I had paid his rent twice in my 20s. I had helped him get clean after his first DUI scandal nearly destroyed our mother. I had pulled strings to get him a management track role in community outreach when he insisted he wanted to build something real. And standing there with coffee dripping from my sleeves, I realized he had taken every rescue I ever gave him and converted it into entitlement. He wasn't ashamed. He wasn't startled. He wasn't even pretending the coffee had been an accident. He looked proud of himself. He tugged at the cuff of his scrub jacket, then glanced around to make sure people were watching. Ryan loved an audience. "Maybe next time," he said, voice raised for the growing crowd. "You'll think twice before talking to me like that." Then he jerked his chin toward the old valet. "And you move my car before I tell Sophia you're disrespecting family." Hearing my sister-in-law's name in that tone made my stomach tighten. Sophia had been in Ryan's life for less than a year, but she had already become the perfect amplifier for all his worst impulses. She loved status, titles, private lounges, and the kind of shallow power that only exists because someone richer is standing behind you. Her father, Gerald Whitmore, had been named CEO of St. Alden 18 months earlier after a merger vote I had opposed. I had lost that battle on paper, but not in substance. I still held the controlling family shares through the trust my grandfather built. What Gerald had was a title. What I had was the hospital's spine. He never forgot that, and neither did I. Ryan took out his phone and started live streaming, because of course he did. He swung the camera toward himself first, then toward me, making sure the coffee stain showed clearly on my clothes. "Look at this," he said in a voice so fake sympathetic it made my skin crawl. "I'm trying to get through a stressful day at the hospital and some unstable woman comes in here causing a scene." A few people murmured, A nurse near reception frowned like she knew that wasn't the whole story, but no one stepped in yet. Public chaos freezes decent people before it activates them. Ryan knew that. He always knew how to weaponize hesitation. "You should probably leave before security drags you out," he added. "Do you understand who you're talking to? My wife's father is the CEO here. One word from us and people disappear." That sentence did something ugly inside me. Not because I was afraid, but because I heard in it the echo of months of quiet corruption. People disappear. Budgets disappear. Complaints disappear. Records disappear. Truth disappears. That was how bad systems operated, not in one dramatic collapse, but in small acts of protected arrogance that everyone was forced to tolerate until the whole institution started smelling like moral decay. My father had built St. Alden with a very simple rule: patience first, ego never. I grew up hearing that at the dinner table. I learned to read budgets before I learned to drive because he used to sit me beside him with spreadsheets and say every number here turns into somebody's life. When he died, I promised at his bedside that I would protect the hospital from anyone who treated it like a throne. Looking at Ryan in that lobby, I knew I had failed to stop the infection early enough. I pulled a handkerchief from my bag and calmly blotted the coffee at my collar. My hands were steady, but only because I had spent years learning how to contain panic in boardrooms full of predatory men. Ryan mistook composure for weakness. He stepped closer. "That's right," he said softly with a mean little smile only I could hear. "Be smart, apologize, and leave." I looked him straight in the eye. "You have no idea what you've just done." He laughed. "No, Emma. You have no idea who backs me now." That was the moment I took out my phone. I didn't call security first. I didn't call Gerald. I called my husband. Michael and I had been married for 9 years. On paper, he was chief operating officer, the executive who handled hospital logistics, staffing flow, vendor approvals, and crisis coordination. In practice, he had become the diplomatic buffer between power-hungry board members and the actual mission of the hospital. He was intelligent, polished, and very good at sounding ethical, even when he was choosing the easier compromise instead of the right fight. We had built a life together that looked strong from the outside. 2 children, a restored brownstone in Lincoln Park, framed family photos, Sunday breakfast routines, anniversary trips whenever our schedules allowed it. But in the months before my California trip, something in him had shifted. He had become evasive around procurement reviews, too patient with Gerald, too quick to say, "We'll handle it internally," too careful whenever Ryan's name surfaced in compliance meetings. I had noticed it. I just hadn't wanted to believe what it might mean. When Michael answered, his voice was low, distracted, probably still in a meeting. "Emma, you landed." I kept my tone flat. "You should come down here." A pause. "I'm with the finance team right now. Can it wait 10 minutes? I looked at the coffee on my jacket, then at Ryan's smirk, then at the crowd gathering wider around us. "No," I said, "it really can't." Something in my voice must have reached him because his silence changed shape. "What happened?" he asked. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't give Ryan the explosion he expected. I only said, "Your brother-in-law just threw coffee on me in the main lobby and announced that his wife's father runs this hospital. You should come see how that looks from downstairs." Michael inhaled sharply. I heard movement on his end. A chair, a door, maybe a curse half swallowed. Then he said more quietly than before, "Stay right there. I'm coming." I ended the call, slid the phone back into my bag, and met my brother's eyes again. 10 minutes, I said. "Let's see how brave you still feel by then." Those 10 minutes stretched like wire across my nerves. Ryan kept talking because silence would have forced him to hear himself. He paced, scoffed, threatened, and kept glancing toward the elevators with the confidence of a man who had never once been made to pay for anything. Twice he told the crowd that I was some bitter administrative woman who didn't understand how the real hierarchy worked. Once he told a nurse to get him a fresh coffee because the first one had been wasted on trash. Every word scraped across me, Not because it hurt in the obvious way, but because each one reminded me how thoroughly he believed rules existed only for other people. I stayed where I was, one hand on the handle of my suitcase, one shoulder still damp, my pulse loud but controlled. I wasn't waiting for rescue. I was waiting for revelation. What made it worse was memory. Standing there in my stained blazer, I kept seeing Ryan at 7 years old with a split lip after a school fight, hiding behind me because he was terrified our father would be disappointed. I kept seeing him at 16 crying in the front seat of my car after failing 3 classes, begging me not to tell Mom because she already thought he was hopeless. I had been his shield for so long that some part of me still expected him to look at me and remember that. Instead, he sneered like I was a stranger who had wandered into the wrong kingdom. There is a particular kind of pain in being betrayed by someone you helped build. It doesn't feel like heartbreak at first. It feels like your own judgment has turned against you. At minute 7, Sophia finally appeared, sweeping through the revolving doors in a white blazer and oversized sunglasses, like the hospital was a runway and not a building full of fragile people. She looked from Ryan to me to the crowd, immediately understanding only one thing. There was a tension here, and she wanted control of it. "What is going on?" she demanded. Ryan strode to her, put a hand dramatically at the small of her back, and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "Some unstable woman tried to humiliate me in front of staff." Sophia looked me up and down, saw the coffee, and instead of asking whether I was okay, she smiled. Then maybe she learned a lesson. That was when I understood with perfect clarity that Ryan hadn't married into stability. He had married a mirror. She pulled out her phone too. "Should I call my dad?" she asked. Ryan nodded immediately. "Yeah, let him know some nobody is causing problems downstairs." I watched her thumb hover over the screen and thought, "Go ahead, call him. Call every protected fool you think can still save you." But before she could dial, the executive elevator doors opened. Michael stepped out with 3 uniformed security officers behind him. The second he saw me, the color left his face so fast it was almost violent. Not white with anger, white with dread. That detail matters because dread does not come from surprise alone. Dread comes from recognition. It comes from the instant your private compromise collides with public truth. Michael's gaze dropped to the coffee on my clothes, then moved to Ryan, then to Sophia, and something in his posture collapsed before he had said a single word. Ryan, blind as ever, actually smiled. He mistook Michael's horror for authority, arriving on his behalf. "Perfect," Ryan said, striding toward him. "About time. Get this woman out of here before she makes a bigger scene." He even pointed at me without hesitation. "And I want the valet written up too." Michael didn't move. He just stared at Ryan for half a second too long, then asked, voice stripped raw, "What did you do?" Ryan laughed. "What did I do? I defended myself. She came at me first." He gestured toward Sophia, and she disrespected my wife. Michael turned toward me, and I saw it clearly now. The calculation, the fear, the guilt, and beneath all of it, the awful knowledge that he had hoped this exact kind of moment would never happen while I was watching. "Emma," he said carefully, "let's go upstairs and talk." That sentence told me everything. Not, "Are you hurt?" Not, "What happened?" Not, "Ryan, apologize right now." He wanted containment, optics, a private room where facts could be diluted. I took one step toward him. "No," I said, "we're talking here." Sophia frowned. "Excuse me." Ryan looked offended on Michael's behalf, which would have been funny if it weren't so grotesque. "Emma," he repeated like the name was a coincidence. Then he finally looked at my face hard enough for recognition to cut through his ego. I watched it happen in real time. The widening eyes, the dropped jaw, the tiny backward shift of his weight. My brother knew exactly who I was. He had known all along. He just hadn't believed I would matter once he had newer power behind him. That truth was somehow uglier than if he'd mistaken me for a stranger. Michael rubbed a hand over his mouth and looked at the guards. "No one touches anyone," he said. "Stand back." One of the officers obeyed immediately. The other two exchanged a glance that told me they were already sensing how dangerous this was becoming. Not physically, but politically. I lowered my voice. "You knew," I said to Michael, not asked, said. He didn't answer. He didn't have to. His silence was admission wearing a suit. I thought of the invoices I had questioned before leaving for California, the vendor switch he had urged me not to challenge until quarter end, the missing documentation around a rushed equipment contract, Ryan's sudden arrogance, Sophia's fearless entitlement, Gerald's increasing reach. It all locked into place with brutal efficiency. "Emma, please," Michael whispered, stepping closer. "Not like this." I almost laughed. Not like this. As if there were a graceful version of discovering your brother had become a protected thug, and your husband had been helping the protection hold. "How long?" I asked. He glanced at the crowd, then back at me. "It's complicated." "No," I said. "It's actually very simple. Either you helped hide what they were doing or you were too weak to stop it." "Which one is it?" His eyes shut for 1 second. 1 second. But it was enough. Ryan tried to reassert himself. "Can someone explain why we're pretending this is a tribunal?" he snapped. "Mike, tell her to calm down. Sophia's dad will lose it if he hears about this." Michael turned on him then. Really turned. And for the first time all morning, Ryan looked uncertain. "Be quiet," Michael said. Not loudly. Much worse than loudly. Ryan blinked. "What?" I said. "Be quiet." Michael's voice shook, but not from weakness, from the crumbling of whatever lie he had been standing on. "You have no idea what you've done." I looked toward reception and saw my general counsel stepping out of the side corridor with the head of HR and the hospital's compliance director. Good. I had texted all three while waiting. If my family wanted a public scene, I was done protecting them from one. By the time Arthur Vance reached the center of the lobby with Denise from HR and Carla from compliance, the air around us had changed. People were no longer just curious. They were attentive in the way people become attentive when they sense that the performance has ended and the consequences are about to begin. Arthur carried a slim black portfolio and the kind of expression that made weak men start rehearsing excuses before he even spoke. He had represented my family trust for 12 years, and he knew enough to read a disaster the way trauma surgeons read vital signs. One glance at my stained clothes, one glance at Michael's face, and he understood the emergency without needing a single line of explanation. "Emma," he said quietly, "you asked for the procurement file." I nodded. "And the access logs?" He handed the portfolio to me, complete as of 8:40 this morning. Denise held a tablet. Carla held another. Ryan looked from one to the other and scoffed, still trying to recover his swagger. "What is this? An ambush?" Sophia crossed her arms. "My father is going to destroy all of you for this." Her voice cracked just slightly on the word destroy. Fear was finally entering the room. I opened the portfolio slowly, not for drama, but because my hands had become very still. And when my hands get that still, somebody is about to lose something important. "Since everyone here seems so confident in the current leadership structure," I said, turning just enough that the surrounding staff could hear me, "let's discuss what that leadership has actually been doing." Michael muttered my name once in warning. I ignored him. Carla connected her tablet to the large lobby display used for patient navigation announcements. The screen flickered, then filled with a procurement summary, vendor names, transfer amounts, approval chains, contract dates. Too many numbers for the crowd to fully understand, but more than enough for the right people to recognize the smell of theft. I pointed at the first section. 3 weeks ago, while I was in California negotiating emergency equipment partnerships, I, a side vendor called Morrow Ridge Supply, received an accelerated payment authorization for $18,000 labeled as emergency cardiac monitoring stock. I looked at Denise. Did the stock ever arrive? Denise's voice was crisp. No. Receiving confirmed 0 inventory. I looked at Carla. Who approved the bypass? She didn't hesitate. Ryan Carter initiated the request through community emergency channels. Michael Lawson approved the secondary release. Final executive override came from Gerald Whitmore. That was the first audible wave through the crowd. Nurses whispered to one another. 2 residents near the elevator stared openly now. Ryan laughed too quickly. That proves nothing. It was a temporary transfer. I turned the page. Then let's keep going. The second section showed wire movements tied to a shell consulting firm based in Naperville. The firm had no staff, no service history, and 1 registered mailing address that matched a luxury condo management office. I didn't need to say Sophia's name yet. The implication was already doing its work. From this shell account, I said payments were made for designer furniture, 2 vehicle leases, and a down payment on a West Loop condo that, according to county records, is occupied by Ryan and Sophia. Sophia's mouth actually fell open. Then she swung toward Michael. You said this was covered. Silence. That line landed harder than any scream could have. I looked at Michael then. Really looked. Covered? I repeated softly. That's the word you used. He dragged a hand through his hair and whispered, Emma, listen to me. Gerald was pushing everything through. He said if I blocked it outright, he would spin the board against you while you were away. He said we needed time. So you gave him my hospital instead, I said. My voice stayed calm, but I felt the words tear on the way out. You gave him my brother, my staff, my father's name, and you called it buying time. Ryan stepped forward, panicked. Now you're making this bigger than it is. Bigger than it is. I turned on him. You threw coffee on me in the lobby of a hospital our family bled to build. You terrorized staff using borrowed authority. You used patient-facing emergency channels to move money into your own life. And now you're still standing here pretending this is some family misunderstanding. He opened his mouth, but Arthur spoke first. It stopped being a family matter the moment hospital funds became private property, he said. Carla changed the display again. This time, it showed security access records. Ryan's badge had entered the executive procurement office 7 separate times after midnight over the last month. Sophia's visitor credentials had been used 3 times despite no operational reason for her presence. Michael's master authorization had signed off on each override. No one hacked the system, Carla said plainly. This was internal. That word internal struck like a gavel. Michael's shoulders sagged. I never took $1, he said, almost to himself. I looked at him with a kind of grief I had no room left to soften. No, I said. You just watched theft happen because confronting it might have cost you influence. You didn't steal the money. You sold your spine. That hurt him. I wanted it to. Then Ryan did the most revealing thing he could have done. He turned toward Michael instead of me and shouted, You promised me this would never hit public view. The entire lobby froze. Sophia stared at him like he had just yanked the floor from under her because he had. Michael shut his eyes. Arthur exhaled once. Denise looked physically sick. And in that exact second, Ryan finally understood there was no version of this where swagger could still save him. I took the microphone from reception because I was done speaking like this was a domestic dispute that needed privacy. My name is Emma Carter, I said into the lobby speaker system, my voice carrying to the glass doors and back. I am the controlling trustee of the Carter Family Medical Trust and acting chair of St. at Alden Medical Center. Effective immediately, Ryan Carter is suspended from all hospital property and operations pending criminal review. Sophia Whitmore's access privileges are revoked. Michael Lawson is placed on emergency administrative suspension pending board investigation. Arthur, notify the board. Denise, have security escort them to separate holding rooms until counsel arrives. Carla, preserve every file, every transfer log, every badge record, and every deleted message tied to these contracts. No one touches a server. Ryan stared at me like he had never seen me before. Maybe he hadn't. Maybe none of them had. What happened next was fast, public, and impossible to undo. The moment I gave the order, security stepped forward, and for the first time that entire day, Ryan looked genuinely shaken. He kept raising his voice, insisting I was overreacting, insisting this was just a misunderstanding, insisting I was destroying my own family in front of strangers. But nobody around us believed him anymore. The old valet he had humiliated stood taller. Nurses who had stayed quiet all morning began murmuring to one another. A few employees even exchanged the kind of look people share when they finally realized they were never imagining the problem in the first place. This was bigger than one cruel stunt in the lobby. It was a pattern, and everyone could see it now. Sophia tried to save herself the only way she knew how. She pulled out her phone, started filming again, and claimed I was abusing my power because I was jealous, bitter, and unstable. But she was too shallow to realize the lobby screens were still lit up behind her with transfer logs, access records, and approval chains. She was filming her own collapse. Within hours, staff who had kept their heads down for months began coming forward. A supply coordinator admitted he had been pressured to approve suspicious requests. A billing employee produced email threads that made it clear executive pressure had been used to bury questions. Even people who had once been too scared to speak finally understood the shield around Ryan was gone. The board reacted faster than I expected. Gerald's access was frozen almost immediately. Ryan was removed from hospital property. Sophia lost every privilege tied to the building. Michael was placed on emergency suspension pending review. Watching my own brother being escorted out in front of the same staff he had bullied should have felt satisfying. Instead, all I felt was a cold emptiness spreading through me. The coffee on my jacket was humiliating, yes, but that wasn't the deepest wound. The deepest wound was realizing my own brother had been willing to throw me away so easily, and my husband had stood close enough to see the truth, yet chose silence, because silence was easier. The next morning, I refused every polished public relations strategy the board suggested. I did not want a carefully worded statement hidden behind legal language, and I did not want a controlled press conference in some quiet executive room where everything would feel distant and sanitized. I chose the main lobby instead, the same lobby where Ryan had thrown coffee on me, insulted staff, and tried to use borrowed power like a weapon. If the corruption had happened in public, then the truth would stand in public too. So, I went live from the center of St. Aldan and told the story exactly as it happened. I explained the assault, the intimidation, the suspicious procurement approvals, the hidden access logs, and the executive pressure that had allowed a culture of arrogance to grow inside the hospital. I did not cry and I did not perform outrage for sympathy. I simply spoke clearly because truth does not need theatrics when the facts are already sharp enough. Then staff testimony began reinforcing everything. One by one, employees confirmed delayed equipment, unauthorized access, and patterns of manipulation that had been tolerated for far too long. By the end of the day, Gerald was forced out completely. Ryan and Sophia were named in civil action, and state regulators had been notified. Michael resigned soon after when the investigation confirmed he had knowingly failed to report what was happening. That night, he came home and tried to explain that he had only wanted to keep the peace until I returned. But peace built on cowardice is not peace at all. It is just betrayal wearing a softer face. I told him I would file for divorce. I told him I would never stop him from being a father to our children because they deserve stability from both of us. But I could not stay married to a man who watched corruption grow and hoped it would somehow fix itself. Over the following months, the legal process finished what that day had started. Ryan lost his position, his credibility, and every illusion of untouchable power. Sophia lost the condo, the money, and the lifestyle she had were ripped. Gerald lost his title, his board influence, and the polished image he had hidden behind for years. Michael lost the career he had chosen compromise over, and I stayed rebuilding the hospital piece by piece, making sure no one would ever be able to bury the truth that easily again. Almost a year later, I saw Ryan standing outside the side gate of the hospital in a coat that looked too thin for the season. He had lost the swagger long before he lost everything else. When he said my name, it no longer sounded arrogant or entitled. It sounded tired, hollow, older than he should have been. He told me that jail, probation, public disgrace, and losing Sophia had destroyed the fantasy he had built around himself. Then he admitted something that mattered more than any apology. He said the worst part was not losing his job, not losing his marriage, and not watching his life collapse in public. The worst part was realizing he had treated his own sister like someone disposable. I listened, but I did not move closer. There are some wounds that do not need screaming anymore because time has already stripped them down to their truth. Then he asked if I thought I could ever forgive him. I told him the most honest thing I knew. I could let go of hatred, but that did not mean he got his old place back in my life. Some doors stay closed because they should. He cried quietly after that, and for once, it didn't feel manipulative. It felt late, just painfully, uselessly late. I left him standing there without a hug, without a promise, and without giving him the comfort of false hope. Michael and I finalized the divorce a few months later. To his credit, he became more consistent as a father after losing the marriage than he had been while protecting the people who helped to destroy it. St. Alden recovered too. Not quickly and not perfectly, but honestly. Staff morale improved, oversight became stronger, and the hospital slowly started to feel clean again. So, if there is one thing I learned from all of this, it is that blood does not excuse betrayal, and love does not require endless permission. Sometimes the only way to save what truly matters is to stop protecting the people who are actively destroying it. And if you were in my place, if your own brother humiliated you, abused borrowed power, and dragged your family's name through the dirt right in front of you, would you have stayed silent to preserve the image of family? Or would you have done exactly what I did and chosen truth instead? We appreciate every viewer who watched this story until the final moment. Everything in this video is fictional and made only for the entertainment educational purposes. We hope this story reminds you that silence does not always mean weakness. Sometimes it means that you have finally chosen maturity, self-control, and the kind of peace that no toxic person can disturb again.